Good. Okay. So this panel is about the return on investment of testing. We have 4 esteemed panelists here, and I think the way I will proceed is to give each one a chance to take about 5 minutes to introduce themselves. They're all from different countries and bring unique backgrounds to the question. And I think that's going to be really fun because the perspective from the different background, public sector perspective, a consulting perspective, an academic perspective, and a technology provider, solutions provider perspective. I think that's going to be very unique. So what I'll do is maybe start with John here. John, you want to take 5 minutes, introduce yourself to the crowd, and tell us about your initial perspectives about ROI in testing.
Sure. Thanks, Jasper. Well, first of all, just for introduction, maybe more philosophically, there are different perceptions of life. There's pessimist view is looking at a glass and saying it's half empty. Optimist view is looking at a glass and saying it's half full. Engineering is looking at a glass and saying this glass is constructed twice as big as it should have been in order to contain this amount of water. Now, I have a background as an engineer. On my personal life, I'm very optimistic. I'm a born optimist. When it comes to my profession, I'm your professional pessimist. I've been in testing for about two decades. Started my career, my first job was in testing, working with medical devices, and I was lucky enough to be involved in some of the early adaptation of some advanced automation concepts, including the random testing, automated random testing, framework-based automation, and so forth. I've worked in the industry for many years. I've been in Cognizant, which where I work today for the past 6 years, where I've had a role in our European role, part of a so-called global think tank. I'm a solution architect working both for business development and also for encouraging the different initiatives that are going around in the world, supporting, for example, digitalization, IoT, and as such. And I still enjoy every moment of being in this hectic but enjoyable testing world. With the word, thanks.
It's hard for me to sort of carry on from where I left off. I spoke about the R in ROI for about an hour ago. So I can only repeat some of the things I said then, which is kind of embarrassing, but whatever. I'd rather respond to a good question than just spout forth theory. I think we have to sort of consider ROI as a bit like a lifestyle choice. It's not, to me, so easy to put numbers in a spreadsheet and say, ta-da, there is the case for more testing, offshore testing, onshore testing, internal testing, automated testing. I think looking at things financially is not necessarily the right way to look at this. And the only easy to understand comparison I can make is like insurance. So everyone in the room, I guess, is insured in some way, their cars, their house, their property, their lives. And how do you put a value on that? I don't know. If you have it, you're more comfortable than if you don't have it. And in some ways, how do you describe that feeling of comfort? I'm not sure numbers can help. So I have a problem with ROI. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jasper. ROI, return investment on testing. First, I am Azizah Hamzah from the Economic Planning Unit. And I just want to maybe talk a bit about the government perspective on ROI. We, as the government, I think we've in a way just embarked on this thing, institutionalizing this thing. But before that, I think, yes, testing was done, but it was done as part of the development process. And what we want to do now is to look at IVV, or independent validation and verification. And going into this, in a way, we have piloted some projects in this. But going into this for the first time in a way, many of the agencies and what the question asked is how much we have to pay for this, because the budget cycle where we plan for our development. That is planned for because we are used to it. We put up our budgets for development, and then we say we have to sort of put up some budget for testing. And then the agencies will say, well, why do you have to do this? You're already testing it, so why do you have to put a separate budget? So the ROI of testing here, I think, for starters, maybe the value of it, as mentioned by Paul just now, is not seen upfront. But what we want to do is to make it a culture. So, but we also see the cost of not testing, because several projects that we have done, we know that there are many delays in government projects. So people say that it's typical of IT projects, but still, there are delays like some big projects, a year, 2 years, and that is also cost. So if we had sort of put in that early testing, so maybe these are the things that we could catch on earlier, and we will not run into all these cost overruns and this sort of thing. So I think if you want to look at ROI, maybe we should also ask ourselves what is the other side, downside of it, what is the cost of not testing?
So we really have a difficult question. Let me start with an example. Who has used Word 20 years ago? Word, Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel. Who has used this 20 years ago? 20 years ago. Who experienced 3-4 times a day that it crashes? Here we go. So who would accept that Word crashes today? Nobody. So it depends what the market is demanding. So even the same system in a different time, there are certain expectations in the market or certain things you can push to the market. In the 80s, 90s, they developed a new version, they throw it out, and the people reported what was not going, so testing might have been very, very lousy. Nowadays, in Word, maybe it's still a little bit lousy, but by far not as lousy as 20 years ago. When you develop a surgery system, an automatic one, who makes operation on your eye, return on investment is maybe the wrong question. You would definitely avoid that there is a mistake, because if there would be two, you are out of market. So putting numbers to return on investment, I think, is very difficult. At least we should differentiate between different types of systems. But it's extremely difficult. In an extreme case, you are out of market.
Okay, in large corporations, ROI is a concept that has been used in so many different fields. In other words, there's only a scarce amount of investment dollars, and the different parts of a large corporation fight for those investments. So the thinking is, all these organizations have very established ROI processes by which everyone submits proposals for their limited funding, and then the proposal with the highest ROI gets that funding, right? Is that a good way for justifying investments in testing? Please jump in. Yeah.
I think it's the absolutely wrong way. The much better way is to define what type of quality do I need on my market. And then the question is what I have to do to ensure this quality as good as possible I can. And then comes the investment question. The return, I don't think is really a question. It's more a question of the quality of the market. This Word example, I think, already frames this somehow.
So Klaus is arguing for a return on quality rather than a return on investment, ROQ.
No, market demand on quality.
Okay, market.
If your market doesn't demand quality, you don't need to test it. You just throw it out. Word in the 80s. It's really true. A lot of apps, they throw it out. If they are really unique, people will report back, and within 2-3 months, they work perfectly. But if there is a high competition, for example, in apps, you can't do that. You will be out. So it's really the market demand on quality which should define how much testing we need to do.
Paul, you wanted to say something?
It's one of these difficult problems that we have to kind of solve or figure a way of getting around, because if we're in a culture where money matters, money counts, which is important, and people count money, you have to talk their language. But I think one of the things we have to do is kind of remove the challenge of doing any testing from the agenda. So, as a suggestion, you might say, well, what testing does is a bit like having an airliner and a pilot. No one says, do we need a pilot or not need a pilot, although that might change. Right? But do we need a navigator? So you could compare, testing as the people who provide the data for navigation in a project. And you can't run a project without data. So the argument for having a tester or testing, I think, is already made. That's not what's on the agenda here. The case is, what is the quantity? How much do you put into it? And again, using this terrible metaphor of a pilot and a navigator, you might say, well, we're just going to use guesswork, we're going to use GPS, we're going to use this, and so on and so forth. So those are the kind of choices. But it's not that the tester can value what they do. I said this morning, I don't believe it's possible for the tester to say what their value is. All they can say is, this is what I can do for you. It's for the customer, the stakeholder, to put the value on it. So if you say to your stakeholder, a stakeholder says, okay, how much will testing cost on this project? You can say, well, I have 2 data points. I have 0, and I have more than you will spend. And where this data point is that you want to make this choice is, what are you prepared to spend? And really, it boils down to that. So the return on the investment is driven by, I can tell you exactly what testing costs, but the value is something that you can only judge as a user, as a customer of my service. As I say, it's like insurance, it's like navigation. How good a navigator do you want? Well, how much do you want to spend? So there isn't a scale. That's the difficulty we have. So I have a problem with ROI as a financial calculation. In fact, there's a lot of financial investors who now believe that shareholder value is not a good measure of success in a business. So you can have shareholders who make lots of money because the value of the shares go up, but the business might not be a successful business in the same way. So people are questioning whether financial measures are the best measures anyway. So I don't know whether that's an argument you want to get into, but I have a real difficulty with this whole idea, okay? And I think we all do, because we know it's hard to come up with numbers. It's my challenge.
I have a comment to that. Obviously, you said it's difficult to put a number on it, but ultimately this is what happens in the marketplace. We were talking about, your analogy to insurance before. Believe it or not, insurance companies have tables where they put numbers on the life of people. What is the worth of a death or an injury, a certain injury? Other companies will do their risk calculations and, for example, determine we will ship out the software, knowing that there are defects that can potentially hurt or injure our users, but the risk is that low that we determine that the market value is high as sitting at now. So it's always about finding the right balance between the two. I don't believe that, bug-free software exists. Maybe it does, but it hasn't been released yet. But it's all a matter of finding what is the optimum level. At a certain point in time, simply becomes cheaper letting your customers finding the last defects. And this is the kind of balance you need to find. Now, I'm also coming from a service provider point of view. So ultimately, I know that if the service I'm providing to the customers is too expensive for them, they will go to another vendor, or they will just not buy the service at all.
Please, Bonaziza.
I think also the issue of quality, demand for quality is something that is there, and also perhaps the proportionally to the criticality of the system. Perhaps there are some systems which are critical where perhaps you have lives, or it may cause loss of lives, something like that, and some systems are less critical. So I guess the amount of money we want to spend on testing may vary according to that. Maybe, I don't know. But also, like in government, there are some systems that you develop once and you replicate it over a number of like hospital systems. So I guess if in those systems also the value of testing is so much more, I think.
Please.
But even for those systems, there are 2 alternatives. One is you find you
vibrating.
One is you find somebody who is willing to be the first user, detects all the bugs, and after half a year you distribute to the other ones. I know cases they do like that.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but it's again a question what the market allows in terms of quality. And last remark, there are some systems you don't have to discuss about testing. You have to certify them, like airplanes, like other systems, and it's defined by the authority what you have to do. So, but these are extreme cases. We should maybe not talk too much about. And this is really expensive.
You know, going back to corporate processes for determining what investments to make, there have been arguments made that for testing, you need a very different kind of process. That means ROI for testing cannot go through the normal channels of ROI calculations. Even the calculations have to be different. And one testing manager put it like this. He says, wow, a crisis is such a good thing that you don't want to waste it. If you want an investment in testing, the crises that happen, you know, like for example, the biggest expansion in testing or the need for testers was Y2K. All of you remember that. If you were a CIO at that time and did not take advantage of that crisis, right, to grow a testing budget, boy, that was an opportunity loss. So I want to ask the panel, is that a good way in large corporations or in the government to go for testing investments?
The government for sure.
Well, that's one way of doing it. Obviously, I think it was pointed out by Azizo that sometimes is not a matter of measuring the quality, but the lack of quality that is evident. So obviously, avoiding headlines and in the newspapers can be one motivation factor that increase investments in testing. Maybe not the best one, but it's certainly one that can be helpful in some organizations. It's all about I think it's all about risk and what is the level of risk you are willing to accept. And again, if you believe that you can just ship the stuff without any testing and just are willing to accept that risk, then you've made a qualified decision on that, and you have to live with the consequences. On the other hand, if you want to hold back the software and keep testing and testing and testing, at some point in time, you'll feel, well, you've done testing enough, and the risk will be much lower than than is you can hold it back from the market.
I want to make a comment and just kind of make a helpful comment, I hope. One of the issues we have with the, let's say, the testing suppliers, the services suppliers, and I was one, and still am, but on a tiny, tiny scale, okay, is one of the issues is that we offer a service and it's measured in terms of it has an indirect measure. And so we say, we're going to offer a service of 100 testers at so many dollars a day and so on and so forth. Oh, that's too expensive. We'll find someone who can give us bodies at a cheaper rate. And that is what happens too often, because we're not selling people like slaves or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. We're not buying and selling people to do things on a fixed rate. You can do business that way, but you will not get a good service, because the more you pay, the incentive is not for the service provider to give you a better service. It's to give you the highest price, in effect. And they compete on price, so that you pay as much as you are prepared to pay, which I don't think is a good basis for buying services. You want to know what those services are and what they will give you. And of course, ultimately, it's about risk, but it's not the provider of the service that can assess the risk. Only the buyer of the service can assess that risk. And the two analogies are, if you're going to go through your life without insurance, it's your choice to do that. Okay, your choice. You've assessed the risk, you've decided, I don't want to pay insurance premiums anymore, they're a waste of money because I've never had an accident. And then you have the accident. The other thing is, again, I'm going to bore you a little bit and say, well, it's a bit like saying, what is the value of having a spouse, a husband or a wife? Now we're getting some smiles. Now, the thing is, it's like, when they're there, they're a pain in the neck, or the backside, or some other pain. But when they're not there, it's very painful, okay? So it's a little bit like that. It's one of these human judgments we've got to make. And we haven't yet got the language or the terminology or the mechanisms, the formula, to give you an understanding of what the service could be. You know, and I'm probably getting it boring saying it's very hard to do it a financial thing. You have to judge what the service you want is. And if the service is, I need to go to bed at night and be able to sleep without worrying about the systems that I'm in control of, what is that worth? Maybe it's as simple as that. But it's definitely on the buyer side, they've got to decide what they want to pay for. You know, and one last thing, and it's not a criticism of this government or any government on this side of the world, but our government makes investment decisions on the basis of politics. And that's why they get into such huge difficulty with their systems and the projects that they kick off. And one bad example, £13.4 billion project for integration of health. It ran for I don't know how many years, and then essentially was cancelled. Because the doctors, the NHS staff didn't want that system, you know, and that's the problem we have typically with governments, you know. So it's not a criticism. I'm just saying, it's very often that we have these fantastic projects to work on. You think this will never work because it's a politically driven solution.
So when the requirements are wrong, you can test whatever you want. You agree? It's useless. Okay. So. That was a good hint. No, more seriously. First of all, I think you can't answer this in terms of the system. You should differentiate between different functions, for example. There might be function you test carefully. There might be other function you don't test at all. This depends. So the quality you want must not be for the overall system. It can really depend on on a set of requirements you want to test more carefully than another set. If the customer can decide this, I'm not so sure. I think there is much more influence to this. So my suggestion would be, when you define your requirements, also define how they should be tested. And then you have to pay the price how it should be tested, or you have to negotiate with the people again and get an agreement if this way of testing these requirements you still want or you don't want. It definitely should not be driven by price. I don't think so. So return for investment, wrong, I think.
Okay, here's another perspective is, I know a large corporation in the US that outsources its testing. And basically in the contract, every year, the work of the testing party, which is testing overseas party, the contract comes down by 15% every year. And the challenge is on the outsourced testing services provider to bring down its cost by 15% every year. So think about that from an ROI perspective. And here's another scenario. So about 7 years ago, I was part of a headhunting firm, asked me to join a committee to select a senior manager for testing in a large corporation. Now, one of the vice presidents was on that search committee of the company. So as the candidates would come in, when we were interviewing them, and this vice president had one question from each candidate, saying something like, your job as a senior manager for testing is to make your budget so small over the years. That means you don't have to follow the ROI process to justify a growing budget. Rather, your budget will be going down, because testing is nothing but a feedback loop to make the developers better. And if it truly is that, the feedback you provide is going to make the developers better and better and better, so your budget should be coming down to the barest minimum. That's a very interesting approach to ROI. So again, and the other one was, I say, in an outsourced context, the contract we give you is going to come down by 15%. How does the panel react to it?
Well, actually, we do have some of these contracts in Cognizant, and we have been facing these challenges. And there's, like it or not, this is the expectation from some of the big customers, some of the expectation from the market. And the only way we can, meet those, constraints is by continually also optimizing testing itself, either by, for example, high degree of automation, high degree of optimization of the testing itself, applying, for example, intelligent methodologies such as, for example, risk-based testing, model-based testing, other methods that can help us actually do better testing and using less effort. That's the only way we can cope with that. So it's a double-edged sword in the sense that, you know, we hate those, obviously for obvious reasons, but at the same time it gives us, you know, this opportunity to be on our toes all the time to improve our efficiencies and the way we provide the service to our customers.
Sure. There's an old joke in Ireland. Any Irish in here, can I ask? I'm not going to offend them. There's no joke. The IRA, terrorists, kidnapped a horse. And the horse was a fantastic winner of races and was basically retired and put out to stud to sire more horses and create, you know, a stud farm or whatever it's called. I don't know. I'm not interested in horses. Anyway, the horse was kidnapped. And the joke is this. The IRA sent a note to the owner with a parcel, and it was one of the horse's legs. And the note sort of said, "Give us the money or the horse will never run again." Now, if you negotiate on price alone and you are the service provider, you can cut your rates to a degree, but eventually you're in business. You can't cut your rates below the cost. You still need a margin to operate. It just needs, businesses need a margin. So the thing is, what you get is not cheaper testing, you get fewer good behaviors. And those behaviors will undermine the value of testing in the first place. So in the same way with the horse, it's like if you keep taking 15% and 15% or whatever the numbers are, as a supplier, you would say, which bit of testing don't you want? Do you want us not to talk to your stakeholders? Okay, that's cheaper. We'll actually get more work in the end because the software will be poor and so on. Do you not want us to share our results with you? Do you not want us to train our people? Do you not want us to give you good people that cost us a lot of money? Do you not want us to use test automation? Do you not, what don't you want? So the negotiation, you have to be incredibly careful about what you get for the money you pay. Now, the problem we have, I say we as the supply side, so I'm on John's side here, is we have not been good at articulating what we actually give you. And that's our problem, because it's a bit like selling insurance again. It's not an easy sale, okay? So this is but you have to communicate with your customer and say, what will give you the most benefit? We can do this, and this. What do you want? Do you want visibility? Or do you want us to just take the problem away? If we give you visibility, that's cheaper because you take some responsibility off us. If you want us to take the problem away, we take the risk. That costs a lot of money because that's on our side and supply side. So it's about communication, and you've got to be willing and capable of having a good conversation with your suppliers, whether your suppliers are a huge corporation or one guy, or the people in your own team, and you are the team. It's a communication challenge, not a technical challenge.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned, Prof, was probably in theory it can work that way, because when you said that the developers will, as we proceed with this, you have to test less and less and cost less and less because the developers become better. Theoretically, perhaps work, but in real life, we change developers and we have new things and we add on to the systems and so on and so forth. So I don't think it will work that way. But except that on the demand side also, I think we would, of course, we want to deal with good, capable, and also honest suppliers, suppliers who will tell us, for these things, what is it that we are getting, and maybe rationalize with us, and tell us, we don't work it out with us. So for these systems, you don't need this testing. Maybe you need this sort of testing. Tell us up front so that we know what we're paying for and what we're getting out of the money we're paying for. Yeah.
Okay. A short comment. I think it's impossible to discuss such a thing without knowing the context, and precisely the context. We were working with one company where we reduced the cost by 50% in 2 years, 50, not 15, and the outcome was even better. So that's also possible. If Paul would show up in his Ferrari, and he has a nice red Ferrari, and wants to negotiate prices, I would say 20%. So it really, I don't know if you have a Ferrari, sorry about that, but...
I was 11 years old.
Okay, but a Ferrari. No, joking. No, so it depends on the context. So this cost reduction might make sense in a company. In larger companies, typically it makes sense because there's always a lot of air, but discussing this without a context is very difficult. And my context forces me to leave now, so I'm sorry, I have to catch a plane shortly after 6. So I hope the discussion goes even better than now, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
Okay, Dr. Paul has to run to the airport, so can we have a show of hands to thank him? Thank you. He's definitely not running away because we're going to ask some hard questions from the audience soon. Right? John, you wanted to follow up just now?
Yeah, just a comment on visibility. Visibility is key, and I agree. And I think, even though that you dislike putting a figure, a dollar value, or ringgit value on testing, sometimes that's the only way of getting the attention of, for example, senior management who don't necessarily understand testing. Now, let me share a story for you, and this is it's a real story. We were doing a project for a bigger bank in Europe, and the customer wanted to have an open book kind of estimation of the testing effort and deciding what kind of cost it should go they should pay for the service. And what we did was the classical risk-based testing approach, where we go through all the requirements, then look at what is the impact if it fails, what is the likelihood, and based on that, on each and every requirement, based on that, we were also able to quantify what is the typical average test effort that goes against each and every requirement. And based on that, we were able to calculate a figure. It was, I think at the time, it was about 8,000 hours or something, or 8,000 days. Now, our customer went with the data and took it to the CIO, and the first reaction was shock. He almost got a heart attack looking at the figure. He was, thinking it will only cost one fraction of this, that effort. And then he asked us, how did you do? How did you derive that estimate? And we told him, well, basically we did it in this way. He said, you know what? I want to do the same exact exercise with you guys, because I want to understand how you're doing the estimation. And we went through the same exercise. Guess what happened? Effort went up by about 50%. Why? He was not willing to take the risk on certain requirements. Where we have quantified, for example, low risk, he was saying, no, this is high risk. Effort went up, and he accepted that because he had the visibility.
Okay, since we have an empty chair, I'm going to ask, I come from the University of Memphis. We have a large testing group, and there's one person there who teaches all our courses on RoI of testing. Robin, would you please join us in the empty chair up front so that we can share your perspectives? Please come and join us. Yeah, join. Now, I'm going to switch it to slightly different aspect of ROI. And the question is, ultimately, ROI is used for justifying. Remember, it's justification of investments in testing, right? So the question is, who should justify for the testing investments? Should it be the testers themselves? Should it be the development group justifying the testing costs? Should it be the users having to stand up, or the business units that are going to use the software? Can I get the panel to respond to that?
It's a tough question. Obviously, I like to see sometimes a software development project like a court of law. Basically, when you approach a tester, software is guilty until proven innocent. While if you approach, a developer, it's the opposite view. And obviously, I would say the best thing is to take your case to the product owner who will make a decision. And if we're both coming with a good case, they'll be able to justify, the level of investment, how much testing needs to be done. That's my view on it.
Sorry, my hand's just gone a bit strange. Another little story, or a thought experiment. if I, and I have kind of done this a couple of times, but let's say it's a thought experiment. So suppose the client or the project manager is calling me in and say, Paul, I need to know how much testing will cost. My reaction would be, well, I need to get the developer manager in the same conversation because I can't give you an estimate without him being involved or her being involved to share that knowledge and to kick it around a bit. Yeah, certainly, Paul. Okay, so the next statement is, the cost of testing perfect software is easy to estimate. But there is almost no perfect, there might be, I've never seen it. I don't think there is perfect software. So the biggest error we make in estimation is caused by something we will only know when we've done the job. I will give you a perfect answer when I've finished. But today, until I've done that, it's a paradox, isn't it? There's loads of paradoxes in testing. So when the project manager asks you, how long will testing take, Paul? I will say to the development manager, well, Bill, how many bugs will you put in? It's a perfectly reasonable question, because I will have said the biggest variance in my estimate will be because of the bugs in the system. And I'm not putting them in. He is. So the problem is his problem, not my problem. Now, that doesn't sound like a very good solution, but we have to talk to each other to come to a consensus. And it's a consensus, not a mathematical formula that we arrive at. You might disagree, I know, but that's fair enough. But I'm saying, dare I say, in the real world, when people are too impatient to get the data, they need to make a call without data. That's how it works. You know, you have to make a call without enough data. That's how it works.
When you say justification, I take it that you have to justify it with the project sponsor, right? So there are many players here. You have the developers, you have the testers, and you also have the project owner. So I think the conversations will have to be done before we get the figure. So I mean the amount of testing that needs to be done, whatever is required based on proportionality, based on your risk appetite and so on. And I guess when you come up with some sort of figure, the justification has to be by the owner of the project, I think, to whoever is sponsoring, because the ultimate responsibility, I think, is the owner of the project. Yeah.
Absolutely. Please, Robin.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me up here, you guys, and thanks for letting me be here. My answer to this is it all depends on the business strategy. So how good do you want your software to be, right? My brother used to be part of a startup company. They were the first company to put movies on Facebook, right? How many people in here have a Facebook account? Facebook, anybody? Okay, all right. Did you know you could watch movies on Facebook? Okay, exactly, no, because no one really wants to take the time to do that, so their company is gone. But when they were in business, they actually put out a lot of buggy software, and they knew it. Their strategy, their business strategy, was to be first to market, first to be the one to put movies on Facebook, and they did that. But there were a lot of bugs in it. So the question is, what's your business strategy? In the case of St. Jude, which is a medical hospital that is curing cancer in children in Memphis, Tennessee, their strategy is low defects, high quality software. So they have a different strategy of more testing, a lot more testing, and they have to see, they have to put a lot more cost into that. So really it goes back to business strategy, and to y'all's point, it's the customer that drives that, the business side that drives that.
So far, I've been the bad guy here on the stage asking my panel, right, their mind, right, all the hard questions. Now, I like to not be the bad guy so much, and I want to open it up to all of you to ask interesting questions. Anyone has a question? Please come up to the microphones. Remember, there's one microphone here. Anybody wants to ask a question? We will not, you don't have to calculate the ROI on asking a question. We will accept it the way it is. Oh, my panelist has a question, please.
I'm going to ask myself. You see? No. But seriously, we seem to have moved away from the return side to the investment side. What does it cost? And it all boils down to this big question of how much testing is enough, isn't it? That's the big question. We know we're going to do some testing. It's not about justifying testing at all. That's a Boolean, yes, no. We're going to have testing. The big question is how much is the right amount? And I have to say, you can put numbers against these things, but then someone like me will come in and say, where did that number come from? Well, I just made it up. And that's kind of the problem. If you want a formula for the cost, here's my formula. This is Paul's formula for Paul's projects, right? I will do an estimate, my own estimate, of how long it will take to do a system test of a system based on a set of requirements. And I might say, are these good, bad, or indifferent requirements? But I might come up with a number. Let's say it's 100 of something. And I'll say, how long would it take to run all these tests in a perfect system? Okay, it's going to take 100 days. That's my number, let's say. But the real world says it'll take longer than that, okay? My estimate for the whole amount of work is it will take 300 days. And there's my estimate. Oh, that's too long. Well, I'll say, that's my experience. If you don't want to hire me, you're not hiring me, you're hiring my experience. That's the deal. Oh, we can do it in 200. I'll say, good luck. You know, you can fly in it, but I'm not flying in that plane. Okay? Now, you have to have your own personal formula. I can't give you, John can't give you, none of us can give you your personal, because your experience is unique to you or your team or your business. You know, and as Robin said, it's a choice that's made by the business you work for, not by the testers, I don't think. That's our problem. You know, we'd love to be in control of things, but we're just not. But we can estimate, and we can defend them by saying, that's my experience. If you have no experience, you have a bit of a problem. But you might borrow someone else's experience, like a consultant or a partnering company or your supplier. You might ask them, although I'd be careful about that. But you need experience, and that's part of the problem we have, is experience. Every project is unique. The data we capture in every project is unique. If we do hundreds of projects, maybe we've got data that will balance out and average and stuff like that. But not many people have hundreds. He's probably got hundreds of projects, so I trust him more than me. Okay?
Please.
So I want to add to that a little bit. In Memphis, Tennessee, again, what we see with our industry partners, Fortune 500 companies like AutoZone, Federal Express, many other companies, what we see is testers at least are gaining more respect and are able to have part of the conversation about how much testing, about what kinds of costs are involved, how long it will take. And we're seeing that the business works now more and more with the testing team to figure out what that answer is. I think agile development is really helping in that space. We're all working together, we're all coming up with a plan together. So as the more educated we can become as testers to know more about what's involved, what the costs are, what the returns are, the better that conversation will be.
Yeah, that's you know, I want to pick up on that too, is, you know, if you're a testing manager and if you have good metrics, you're keeping good data, for example, all the defects you got the last 5 years, you know, you're keeping all the data, you're quantifying that data, and how much it costs to fix, you know, to do root cause analysis on correcting the defect, even taking all your defects and categorizing them by criticality. You know, if it's this critical level, this is the person. The more such data you have, remember, ultimately ROI is about justification. And the more data, historical data from your own organization, your own applications, your own defects that you have, it provides a solid foundation for justifying that you don't have to go to very traditional ROI kind of metrics, because you are using defect data and correcting defect data to justify, to make the same argument in some ways. Any other questions besides from my panel? Paul, did you answer your question?
No.
Oh, you asked a question, but you didn't answer it.
I'm not satisfied. No. No. I'm not satisfied. I'm wearing my questioner's head now. Okay. I'm not satisfied. This isn't good enough.
Okay, we need another question from the audience then. Yeah. Anybody wants to ask a question about how is ROI done in your companies? I'm curious. Maybe you can don't ask. come and tell us how ROI is done in your projects. Anybody can explain that in your organizations? Do you guys use the methods they use? Please. Let's have a show of hands for our first questioner.
Not exactly a question. Just like you say, since ours is a product-based company, so when we work for a product, then we try to make it flexible for various stakeholders and clients. So it's more like the product company is investing more into testing because they want their product to be of better quality so that it is sellable to more customers. So the testing is really important phase in any product-based company. So it's like kind of a other side of the coin which we are discussing here, more like whether testing is needed or not, but our side it's more like testing is more focused. And we follow Agile, so in Agile there's always a ratio of 3:2, 3 developers to 2 testers, so they from that can see that testing is quite an important phase.
Great, great, thank you. Any other perspectives? Any other perspectives? Now here's a question for the panel. Should the total investment in testing ever be a percentage of the amount spent on development? And if so, what is your perspective on that?
No, I don't agree that that should be the case. It depends again on the context. Give an example. Some systems, if you're just making a minor change, from a coding perspective, you might have just maybe a couple of hours to do the coding and unit testing, whatever needs to be done from a development point of view. But from a testing point of view, it might be a gigantic effort. It might necessitate, for example, a lot of regression testing, might necessitate some kind of impact analysis to see what are the kind of systems that have been affected by that particular change. And actually, I see when we talk about the world going digital, agile, we see more of this happening, because what is happening is basically our, so to speak, old monolithic systems that used to be siloed are now being combined together. And this ultimately can lead to these so-called chain reactions, where you make a small change, a small corner, and suddenly you have the domino effect, everything starts falling over. So it's definitely not a percentage. In pure development project in the past, I know they were discussing about the ratio of 25 to 30% of development effort, but I think, going digital, that might be a whole different story. It might be, 400% compared to development or whatever. So I don't think we can put a number on that, unfortunately.
I agree with John. I mean, it's kind of meaningless to put a percentage on things. You in your project might have the experience that this ratio, three developers to 1 tester is about right, or 3 testers to 1 developer is about right. It's about right for you in your environment. And no one can take that away from you, because it's a piece of data you've got and no one else has. So you are best informed to make that call. If you want to reduce the proportion of testers to developers to 0, all right, maybe not. Okay, get the developers to test. Don't call it testing. Change the phase after development, change its name from testing to rework. A little thought experiment. Change its name and then see how the conversations around the table about the cost of testing change. It's as simple as that. Testers, if the bulk of the effort we commit is because of the bugs in software which make our estimations useless because they're all wrong, okay? If the conversation is about the quality of the software coming into test rather than coming out of test, the conversations change a lot. It then becomes how the hell, it's not the cost of testing that's our biggest problem, it's the cost of rework, and which should be the real conversation. So I can't answer the question, but I can suggest that if you juggle the numbers and change the name of a couple of things, you can have a completely different conversation. And it might help you. It might help your boss to understand what's really going on. And that's our job, to tell, to speak truth to power. This is what's going on in your project. We, the testers, are not the problem here. It's the developers who are shipping lousy code. Or the developers are shipping perfect code, and we're doing a whole lot of bureaucratic exercises which have no value. It's somewhere in between, okay?
Please jump in. Yeah.
Putting a figure on testing percentage of development, I think it's not definitive. I mean, on the supply side, I think you can go with that, but on the demand side, and like for example, in organizations, in government organizations, and maybe in corporates, I don't know, but the thing is, we have to have an estimate figure, because the thing is, we have to ask for the budget for the following year, you know, and you have to have it this year. So if you don't have a figure at all, then there's nothing you can budget for. So we have to have some sort of estimates, but it may not be definitive. We try and do it however close you can.
So about 10 years ago, I'm the director of the System Testing Excellence Program, and Jasbir Dhaliwal is the founding director of that same program. So about 10 years ago, Jasbir and I and our team of researchers are sitting around talking, and we figured out that if you shift left, if you take testing to the beginning of the system development life cycle, if you do early testing, you can dramatically increase the quality and dramatically reduce the cost of testing. So that percentage number then becomes a function of how well you're doing early testing, how well you're doing requirements testing, how well you're doing design testing, analysis of the whole process as you get started through the development life cycle. So I don't know that there's a percentage that's a standard number, because it really depends on the process you're following, the product, the context, and everything that's been said up here on this stage. So the more you can shift left, the more you can start earlier, the more quality, the less testing, I think, takes place.
Okay, in the interest of time, we only have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask it again. And this is both for the panel and also for all of you, right? Now, we all have heard, you know, maybe we are not fully satisfied with quantitative measures of ROI in the financial sense, especially Paul, right? We all understand that. There are difficulties. So let's forget the financial math, put it aside. Ultimately, ROI is about justification of investments in testing. What other ways can we justify? If Dr. Paul had been here, he would say something like, based on his philosophy is, look, if we spend so much more on testing, we will sell 20 more cars or 50 more pens, or whatever you're testing. That's one way. The other way, like in nuclear power stations, in a project I was involved in Canada many years ago, we'll say, well, if you don't test this reactor or the software driving the reactor, so many people may die, in the neighborhood, right? Those are also justification methods. What other methods have you folks used if you guys are not using financial measures? And this is both for the panel and for any one of you. In your own remember, you can justify things non-quantitatively too. And I'm curious, there might be some interesting things there that we can learn.
Maybe I'll take the first stab at it. Obviously now, again, back to the going digital. What is happening is, of course, we are putting customer in the center. So basically, it all revolves about customer experience and governing the end-to-end customer experience. So it's a lot, the discussions that are happening now are not happening with the CIOs, but with the CMOs, Chief Marketing Officers, which are equally having, powers and budgets now in different organizations. And it also means from them, branding, reputation, customer satisfactions are becoming key. So you might not be able to put dollar values on those, but if you can, qualitatively put some idea about, the kind of increase you can achieve in those, it can help your case.
I'm probably going to avoid the question, but just no financial. If you were here this morning, you knew I was talking about shift less and stuff like that. And I want to give some advice to the government, okay? The biggest challenge that I have as a supplier to government of testing services is that what usually happens is when you make the offer of, if we get in early and we do a proper review and we take a critical view of the requirements, we'll find lots of problems which will cost you millions, or maybe cost you the whole project and program 2 years away. And what happens is the customer, the government, and this has happened to me, will say, but we're tied into a contract with our suppliers and we're not allowed to make any change to the requirements after this date, and we've signed them off and they are cast in stone. That's the end of shift left, or some part of it anyway. Oh, let's get involved with the developers. Oh no, our contract won't allow us to interfere with how they work. Oh, okay. So what can you do? Well, we can test at the end when it's bloody expensive and traumatic, and by that time it's too late to repair the disaster that we've got on our hands. So my advice is, if you do not manage your suppliers will manage you. And if you allow them to manage you, they will impose on you the safest, riskless, or less risky arrangement to give them control in the situations they know will happen. So when you have a crisis in the project, and all projects have crises, we know this from our experience, the supplier will say, yeah, we can do that, but there's a price. Yeah, we can do that, but there's a price. We can do this, there's a price. If you know, and you've any experience of IT, manage your suppliers. You have to do that. And give yourself the power to have visibility of all the test records that they're producing. Just do that. Do nothing more. So if I want to see all the test records you've got. Now, that power that gives you means that if you say, I'd like to see what you're doing over in this site over here, and they are obliged to give you that information, you can see for yourself what's going on. Now, if they are not sharing the knowledge they're gaining as they test and they're finding problems, you have to go and seek it for yourself. Maybe you hire a consultant, I don't know, but if you're not allowed to see the information that you are paying for, you are your own worst enemy. You've got to make it visible. They have got to make it visible to you, and given that you are paying them to provide this information, they cannot hide it from you. It's not ethical. But if you sign a contract that says they are not obliged to share it with you, you are losing half the value of the service you're buying.
So the question was, are there any other methods of justifying investments in testing that are non-financial? Anything from you, Robin, and anybody else? Any interesting ones in your experience? You're all experienced testers. What other ways can we?
So I was going to add one more short story that we work with an industry partner in Memphis again, who the vice president of testing is now the vice president. Her title is vice president of go-to-market. She still does testing, that's her main job, but vice president of go-to-market. We're no longer counting the dollars and cents of testing. It's all about exactly what John said: brand, reputation, customer service and satisfaction, internal or external customers, but getting the software in the hands of people that need it and building and maintaining the company's reputation as a viable entity that can actually produce high-quality software.
Any responses from the audience? No? Please come to the microphone. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rahul. I'm from Cognizant. I'm John's colleague. So one of the measures that I've heard about, which is not at all financial and mostly adopted by product companies, is the Net Promoter Score. It basically speaks about how much will your product or service be recommended by an employee or a user to someone else, saying that please use it. So we generally measure the detractors and the promoters, and that is just a clear measure of how the business is going. So that, I think, is a clear input for which goes back into testing to see whether the NPS has to increase. So I thought of sharing that.
Excellent. That's a great answer. Thank you. Any others? Well, if not, I want all of you to show of hands and thank my panel for answering all the hard questions. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you once again to our panelists and our moderator.